Welcome to your readings for the week. The week ending the 26th. The 26th. There's something about that date, the 26th. You don't know what it is, though. I'm sure it was somebody's birthday. I'm sure it'll come to me by then. First week of, actually, no. This is actually the first full week of the Mercury retrograde. It just went retrograde just a couple of days ago. Let me tell you about the stupidest thing that happened to me. And I can't blame it all on the Mercury retrograde either, because the lesson here is I have been overstressed the last few days. Oh my God. Just overstressed. So busy. Go, 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 go. Absolute chaos. Dragging my knuckles on the ground because I'm so exhausted, tired. And I'm planning a trip to Portland. I got my tickets yesterday and I took my time because I knew that I was trying to do them in the middle of doing all kinds of other stuff, and I was very, very careful. And then I got on the phone with my friend who was going with me too, and I was like, I got our tickets. And blah, 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 and this and that. And we're going to do this. Now on to the hotel. Let me just reserve a hotel. I found one, and it's super cheap. I had looked at it while I was at work earlier at my other job. And I'm having this conversation at the studio. And I was like, oh, this is a steal, and it's super cheap, and it's awesome, and it's really nice, and blah, blah, blah. And I can't believe it. And this is a gem, and it's only 20 miles away from where we're supposed to be. And it's just great, blah, 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 blah. And then I booked it. And then I was like, yes, 1, 2, 3, just got to reserve the car, and we're good to go. Everything is all set up. Yay, blah, blah, blah. I felt so much better. And then I went back and I was like, you know what? No, I have to reserve the car. And I'm going back to the itineraries of my flights, and I'm going back to the itineraries of my hotel and all of that stuff, right? And I noticed something. I booked a hotel in Indiana, and I'm going to Oregon. This stuff happens to me all the time because my brain is like a ping pong ball going in a million different directions. It happens all the time. And I went, no. And it's midnight at this point, and I have had 3 full days back to back to back that have just go, go, go since I wake up in the morning, and it's midnight, and I have to fix this. And so while I was booking the hotel earlier, we were looking at insurance, and I was like, stupid insurance, blah, blah, blah. My friend and I are like, yeah, that's crap. We don't need that. And I'm like, no, we don't need that. I'm not paying for that crap. Because I didn't, they charged me for those rooms. I literally canceled them within the same day, and they charged me for those rooms. Now, of course, I'm going to fight it. But not today, because it's go, go, go day. Or tomorrow. Probably Monday. Okay. So, anyways, that's my cone of shame for the Mercury retrograde so far. Not even a full weekend, and I've already royally screwed myself and cost myself a couple of $100. That's just brilliant, right? Brilliant. Do you know what the good news is? I get 3 whole days with my hubby, who I haven't seen in months, practically. So I'm looking forward to that in a couple of weeks. Let's get to these readings, see how the Mercury retrogrades are affecting all of you. We're going to start, as we always do, with Darcy. And with that being said, let's bump up to the beginning of the week here and see what we've got going on. The moon basically just leaving Taurus on Sunday. Saturday and Sunday, as in today and tomorrow. The moon is in Taurus, and it's really not For the most part, it's just, especially tomorrow, moving into conjunction with Uranus, which is technically in Gemini, but it's still on the cusp and continues to be on the cusp throughout the end of the week. Uranus, honestly, clearly, we already know, moves at a snail's pace, not quite as slow as Pluto, but it, 7 years in a sign. So he's going to be on that cusp for a while. And still in a grand sextile with the Sun and Saturn and Neptune, all of which are retrograde. Uranus is the only planet that is not retrograde. And I think that what's interesting about this is rebellion. Rebellion is the word, because Uranus is all about rebellion. And with the Sun focused on career, and the other two planets' influences retrograde and focused on your day-to-day schedule, it's like, the only way that I can describe it is one or the other fighting against each other, and you're rebelling against both. You're like, you know what, fuck you and fuck you, because I don't want to deal with either one of you right now. I'm dumping both of your behinds. And it's a struggle, especially because Uranus is focused on money. That creates another part of the struggle. This is like, yay, I'm making money, but you're also completely and totally ruling my time. And that is like, you don't even get a chance to really enjoy your money, if that makes sense. At the same time, though, if you were to look at it, quote unquote, logically, this is good for the long run, for the future. But when we get to the point where it feels like this is the only place I ever see, and when we get to the point where it feels like they own your whole life and you have no say in it, it starts to get really frustrating. And everything inside of you begins to rebel against that. And because you have Uranus really spearheading that, it's like a double-edged sword, because Taurus is stubborn and doesn't like to be pushed and told what to do or forced into anything, and neither does Uranus. So it's like double stubbornness right now. However, typical Mercury retrograde fashion, always creates these problems for a reason. We're going to create this problem so that we can solve this problem, so we can fix this problem and eliminate the problem. And maybe the problem is, drum roll please, where you work, right? This battle in your head going back and forth between do I stay or do I go now, it's really making you crazy. You know what you want to do, and you know what you're afraid is going to happen. And the struggle is between those two things: what you want to do and what you think is going to happen. Your fear over what could happen, your fear over what you have been told your whole entire life. So, with that being said, nothing fixes itself. You have to fix it. You have to put things in place to fix it, if that makes sense. Now, this is just a weird thing that just happened, but I just so happened to kind of look over at the wheel, and for some reason, out of the corner of my eye, the sign of Sagittarius's glyph blinked at me, like it disappeared and came back. Now, there could be a significance there with a Sagittarius. It's highly possible that, there's a Sagittarian influence in here somewhere. We have talked about a couple of Sagittarians with drinking problems in your life, I know, but this may not be one of those people. It may be a different Sagittarian that brings more of a motivational energy. That's what Sagittarians are really good at when they're at their best. Okay, when they're destroying themselves with alcohol, no, they're just bitches or assholes or whatever. But when you've got a Sagittarian that's using that energy in the right way, it's a very powerful motivational tool. So it could be somebody around you that is kind of like that, and you may not realize is a Sagittarius. Speaking of fire signs, I pulled the wands. This one is the King of Wands. The King of Wands. Wands are all about spirituality, spiritual growth. You know, the king is like, hey, I've grown. Of course, that phone's going to go off. I'll get it in a minute. The King of Wands in this position is a clever self-made man. Determination. You know what's really funny? Just talking about Taurus and stubbornness. I love when this happens. Just talking about Tauruses and stubbornness. My dad was a Taurus. I'm sure I've told you the story before. But I used to, kind of dig as he'd go on and on about how he was a Taurus and Tauruses are the best and nobody is as good as them and blah, 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 blah. And then I would always, just kind of look back and be like, yeah, stubborn as hell too. And he would say, we're not stubborn, we're determined. Okay. And the truth is that those two things there's a world of difference between them, and they are the same thing at the same time. Your stubbornness works in your favor as long as you're being stubborn about getting ahead or getting what you want. Okay. If you're being stubborn about not being pushed in the direction that you are trying to manifest, that's where you're working against yourself. But determination and stubbornness really do go hand in hand, and they can really, really work together if you work them together the way that you should. So that's what I have for you. I'm already going to take a break and find out who the heck that was. I will be right back. Okay, moving on to Jeannette. And Uranus, and Venus. Uranus and Venus continue in Gemini, and we're kicking off the week with the moon as well. Interesting. It's the emotional moon. Interesting. Moving into this week. We're going to kick off the week with the moon moving in a conjunction with Uranus. Uranus continues to be in a grand sextile with the sun, Saturn, and Neptune. Saturn and Neptune focused on what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. The sun focused on career, Uranus and the moon focused on money. With the moon influencing money, we're talking about security here. We're talking about needing money for security purposes. And as it's sort of coming out of Taurus and into Gemini on that day, we can see that there's multiple influences here, or that it affects multiple people, we'll just say. And of course, we know who we're talking about here. Uranus is doing the same thing, transitioning from Taurus to Gemini. And I just had this thought pop in my head that's really kind of funny and interesting. And that is that, almost like reverse roles, if that makes sense. Let me explain with an example. My husband and I have always switched places. I'm the one that's like a curmudgeon. We can't spend a dime, blah, 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 blah. And he's just like, spending it all over the place. And then like all of a sudden, I'm just like, I'm tired of being like this. And I decide that, I want to be a little bit more free with the money that I work really hard for. And he's just like, well, just spend anything, blah, 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 blah. We always switch places. We've switched roles in lessons multiple times. And, I think that happens in a lot of relationships. I don't think I'm an exception to a rule or anything like that. I think that happens in a lot of relationships. And there may be that sort of indication of roles switching, if that makes sense, which is it's kind of comical, and yet it's kind of frustrating at the same time. um Jupiter is also in a grand sextile with Pluto and Saturn and Neptune as well. All of these planets, Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, they're all retrograde. And Pluto is bringing that sort of influence of those you love, those people that are in the home, so to speak, the very, very fiber of you. So we're talking closest family members here, into the mix. And this sort of adds an interesting little layer to things, I think, because in all honesty, you're trying to focus on taking care of these things, and yet you're going through something with the family right now, and you need your focus to be on that, but you're still not done focusing on finances and things like that. I think there's two things going on here. One is that both you and your husband are just worrywarts, complete and total worrywarts, and that's really getting in the way of everything. It's creating delays that don't necessarily need to be there. um it's which Mercury retrograde is already doing, right? So you're just sort of adding fuel to a fire that's already burning out of control, if that makes sense, in that respect. So you want to be careful with that. You want to be mindful with that. The more you worry about things, the more amplified the problem becomes, right? And yet when you just do what you need to do to put things in place to fix things, it may not seem like a lot, but even that little bit kind of takes the edge off, and it takes so much of the weight off, if that makes sense. So we're kind of looking at the beginnings of changing our ways of thinking about things, which is hard because we're so wired to do it a certain way. And yet at the same time, it's so much easier than you realize. You just take control of your brain instead of your brain basically doing whatever it does. You can't tell Mario he needs to do this. You have to show him. Men don't respond to being told what to do, but they do pick up on what you're doing, sometimes in a very annoying ways. Let's look at Venus. Venus is in a square with Mars, continues to be in a square with Mars. And at the end of the week, that's amplified into a T square as Mars moves into opposition with Neptune and Saturn. And so this creates a bit of chaos in your world, of course, especially when Neptune and Saturn have been really helpful, really working with you. Now, all of a sudden, they're working with you and working against you at the same time, which is just kind of sort of like frustrating and annoying. So, in this sense, Mars is bringing up a lot of anger triggers. And with Mars bringing up a lot of anger triggers, and Venus focused on creative, sort of long-term goals. Again, this is what's getting in the way of your creative flow in terms of spending time doing quote unquote creative things, if that makes sense. So part of that is the overthinking, the crazy overthinking. It gets in the way every single time. But part of that too is, you're so focused. Again, the worries are taking over all of your mental space. So how can you be creative when your mental space is being taken up somewhere else? It's like a vicious cycle. And I think that these elements coming together, frustrating though they may be, and especially during Mercury retrograde, we're also kind of like looking at it from a different point of view. It's like, I could do this or I could do that. It presents a choice. And whenever the choices are presented to you, it's up to us which choice we want to make, right? We have, of course, can just make the choice that we would always make, which is to fall back on bad habits. But why? When we could make a different choice, you never know. You also got to give it time. You give it 5 minutes, it's not going to work. It's a lifestyle change. It's like dieting. It's like exercising. It's like any of it. 10 of Pentacles. Now we're talking about worrying about money here, and here comes the 10 of Pentacles. And the 10 of Pentacles is like, everything is fine. Don't worry about it. Finances are good. Specifically, the 10 of Pentacles in this position indicates financial security, strong family bonds, peace, harmony at home. Everything is great. Okay. Worrying doesn't make everything great. Being at peace with your choices and making the right choices, that's what brings harmony at home. So that is what I have with you. Give me just a second. I'm going to pause this for a minute. I'll be right back. Moving on to Connie. Ooh, I just realized that Leo season begins this week. I mean, I knew that was going to happen, but it just officially hit me. Leo season begins this week. I do believe tomorrow actually is the first day of Leo. No, it's the 21st. Actually, 22nd. 22nd is the first official day of Leo season. So the sun is moving into Leo. And of course, Mercury is still there retrograde as well, both of which are focused on career. Now, on one hand, the sun is where you shine. That's a good thing. On the other hand, Mercury retrograde, messing around in your career. That's a little bit tricky and potentially a little bit scary also. That being said, the sun comes into Leo in opposition with Pluto. Of course that's going to happen. And Pluto's focus is on the home. Pluto is retrograde. Pluto's all about change and transformation. So when we retrograde that, it's sort of again being stuck in that, being in limbo, and nothing is happening, if that makes sense. There's a couple of different things about this. One, the retrograde Pluto focus on the home really is a really good example of how it has been feeling the past couple of years, right? And it's that whole, with everything that has happened, everything that has happened is an anchor. And while you can't just pretend that it wasn't really that big of a deal, or just kind of sort of forget about it, you do have to put it down and walk away from it eventually, in order to move forward, because of course we can't drag the past behind us, and the older we get, the harder it is to drag that bag of trash with us, especially if we have a lot of bags of trash. And that's actually a visual that was given to me, and I cannot remember if it was given to me in a class or if it was given to me by spirit, because I've been using it for so long myself now. But all of those things, all of those traumas, if you visualize them as bags of trash, you see just how ridiculous it looks as you are just trying to get through life, dragging all of these tremendous bags of trash. I mean, I look at them as like contractor bags full of trash. So there's like 3 regular garbage bags in each bag, and some of the trash is like that. And then we have some odd little ones too. And it just becomes, think about that. I mean, how far would you go walking down the street, dragging all of that behind you? The older we get, the harder it is to do that. Well, emotionally, it's the same thing. We may not physically feel it in the same way, but at the same time, we do physically feel it in one way or another. So with that being said, what I'm trying to get at here is this week I do feel that things are picking up, but I also feel like as they're picking up, delays are being presented at the same time. It's really frustrating, and it's going to make you want to lash out and get angry, lash out and freak out, exhaust you and just put you back into bed, etc., etc., etc. That's the quote unquote normal way of dealing with it. But this week, Mercury's in retrograde. We're calling on you to deal with it in a different way, or at least try to deal with it in a different way. Mercury is retrograde in Leo, and that Mercury retrograde is affecting your career, or focused on your career, I should say. However, the only issues that Mercury is really having at this time is none. There is no issues. Mercury is in a sextile with Venus and continues all the way through the week being in this sextile with Venus, right up until I think, um, let's see, Thursday, actually, right up until about Wednesday, Thursday. So, with that being said, this is Mercury and Venus working together. Venus is focused on long term goals, very girly, very creative, very out of the box sort of ways of thinking, especially because this is influenced by Gemini. And Gemini is just like out there, okay? Any Geminis that you know, they are out there, but it's all about the brilliance of their ideas because they're out there. So, with that being said, this is what Mercury's retrograde has to offer, and this is what he's doing. And the fact that he's retrograde is pulling it back to give you a different view, slowing things down to give you a different view of something in particular, something that you have approached and looked at and then thought no, and all of a sudden for some reason it's nagging in the back of your mind to look at it again. And that's that slingshot being pulled back to give you a different view. Now the issue with that slingshot is always the same. Once you let go of it, it goes and it takes off, right? But I don't want you to get freaked out by that, because it could take off into something really, really good as well. So it's, keep it in mind. And if you don't know exactly what it is, that's okay. It will present itself. Okay. I think in your heart of hearts, you know what it is, but it doesn't matter. It will present itself. Now we have the moon coming into Leo also this week, because we have a new moon in Leo on Thursday, Friday into Saturday. And then by late Saturday, it is moving on into Virgo. So, pretty much the last few days of the week, we have a moon influence. And, it's not necessarily good, bad, or indifferent. The fact that the moon and the sun are in conjunction with each other, thus creating a new moon where you can't see it on Thursday, that just means that we add an emotional element to what's already going on between the sun's opposition with Pluto. So that inability to change, you want to shine, but it's getting in the way. It becomes like an emotional blow up. Now sometimes this emotional blow up happens because we just get to a point where we're so sick and tired of being stuck in the same place that we say no. Or we get so overwhelmed with being stuck in the same place that maybe we realize that we have just, put it off for too long and we really just need to get things done. Whatever that is for you and for your specific situation, for everybody it's different. And I think for me it's been different multiple different times. It just depends on the situation and the timing and what's going on around it. So I would say the moon's amplifying things a little bit, but not to the extent of breakage or breaking you. As we move on to Friday, the moon moves into conjunction with Mercury. Now, Mercury is not really interacting with any other planets once that sextile with Venus ends. So this is where the moon and Mercury are kind of working together towards your career. And we're speaking about, because the moon is not just emotional, the moon is deep. Like, what I do needs to mean something. Okay. It's not about money. It's not about what I'm doing. It's about what's behind what I'm doing. Something that brings you peace and makes sense. And it sort of tweaks the view a little bit about what you're doing in terms of career. And I think this might be the slingshot that I was talking about. This might be where it begins with Mercury, because suddenly the decision isn't logical anymore. It's very much emotional. It's very much about what feels right, not what's the right thing to do. And I think that the change into what feels right all of a sudden makes the decision a lot more easier to make, if that makes sense. We have the King of Swords. Swords are air and strength and logic, and being level headed. And the King of Swords in this position, wise, mature professional, intellectual genius, always has self improvement around him, always striving to be better than he was yesterday. That's kind of our goal in life as humans, really, is to be better than we were yesterday. And which you have been doing. You have been doing for quite a long time now. I think that with this, I think that what all of this comes down to is the fact that decisions to be made to do what you have been doing have been difficult because your heart isn't in it in the same way that it was. And I think that that's because in that business it's cutthroat, and you meet a lot of people who are only in it for the money, or a lot of people who've been victimized by people who are only in it for the money. And this sort of fight to prove that you're not one of those people becomes exhausting after a while. And it's there's no way out of it in this type of business. So I think it's really opening up the idea, not so much that you're stepping away from that fully, but that you're doing it and approaching it in a way that is completely different than the way you were before. That's what brings success, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you. Moving on to Jenny. It is Leo's season officially this week. I just found out, actually. I just found out. Only because I just started paying attention, of course. And but yes, the sun moves into Leo pretty early on in the week, actually, about Tuesday or so. We hit the first day of Leo. So the sun moves into Leo. We already have Mercury in there, who's retrograde in Leo. Let's talk about that retrograde Mercury in Leo for a minute. First of all, at the beginning of the week, just for the first couple of days of the week, Mercury is in a sextile with Venus. Venus is all girly and creative and really focused on long-term goals, very heavily influenced by Gemini, which is not necessarily, I mean, it's creative, but in an intellectual way. It's bringing this sort of balance, actually, between the logic and the creative that is kind of quite beautiful. And this Mercury retrograde really working with that influence right now, which is quite good, actually, I must say. So we have that going for us in terms of that Mercury retrograde, which is good because it's all focused on your career. And we don't want Mercury retrograde focused on our career, especially in the financial industry, because miscommunications, more ego-driven lunatics around, things like that. It's not something that you want to deal with. But it's also what you deal with on a regular basis. So it's not new. It's just seems to be happening a little bit more than usual. But taking that into consideration, the fact that that's happening also gives you an opportunity. And where Mercury's retrograde is stirring up all of the pompous, egotistical, arrogant crap around you, it's also showing you the way to use your ego correctly. Because all of the arrogant, egotistical mumbo jumbo that's happening around us, they're just all really good ways that we should not be using our egos. That's how these people are using their egos to justify feelings that will never go away because they will never deal with them. Okay. We are in a different caliber here. We're looking at these situations as, I think we need to do something differently rather than going straight to what I would normally do. A good example of that, I was on the phone with my girlfriend and she was drunk. And it's really annoying to talk to anybody when they're drunk, but her in particular, I love her to pieces. But we had the same conversation in a loop for 2 hours, basically. And my kid lives up there. So we were talking about the kids. And my first initial reaction is always to get defensive because this is my kid you're talking about and I've already heard all about this and it was a completely different story. And and she's just like, well, you're not here, you don't know. I mean, he straight up lied. And I'm like, this kid has never lied. I mean, that's just not true, he's lied, but it's not really his way of doing things. And of course it was, well, yeah, of course all moms say that about their kids. And I'm like, no. And so, of course, my first instinct in a situation like that is to like rip her head off. What the hell are you talking about? And I realized that this time that wasn't going to help. Just like it hasn't helped all of the other times. So I just got quiet and I kept my mouth shut. And it was really, really hard, but I did it for at least 30 minutes. And all I can say is the only thing that I avoided was arguing with her, but I was still frustrated and angry and maybe a little bit hurt, but more annoyed than anything over this conversation. And I'm usually annoyed by her drunk conversations, but my kid is up there now and having to hear about what she thinks is wrong with him is really annoying. But I managed to not fight with her and to choose to have this conversation with her when she's sober, and not when she's drunk, because she's not going to take anything that I say anyways in that state. That's kind of the lesson. Does it make you feel better? No. Does it actually fix anything? No. Okay. Because I also don't want to open the door to she calls me more, because I'll just sit there and be quiet and hold my tongue and not say anything. I really don't want to deal with that either. So I have to find a healthy balance there of how to sort of deal with that, but not just deal with that. That's what life is. And we don't like when these annoying things come up, but they do. There's no way around that. So we just have to be good at trying to figure out how to get around them, because wanting I can't believe that happening just doesn't work. And I'm not seeing you doing this, by the way. I'm seeing somebody around you doing this and you rolling your eyes and going, why again? Why? And you want to just react because it's frustrating and annoying. But I think there might be a different way of approaching it. It may not be the best way. It may not be the most satisfying way yet. Sometimes the satisfaction comes later. It may not be what you want. But sometimes just standing up and saying the feeling that you're feeling right now isn't really satisfying either. Sometimes maybe just not having the animosity between the two of you is a little bit more satisfying, even if you didn't get to say what you wanted to say, if that makes sense, in the way that you wanted to say it. Because we just have to maintain diplomacy in order to get anywhere in the world, right? So there is that. Mercury's retrograde is Two things. One, it's that pompous ego communication, over communicating at that. But also, I have seen it's really, really, really teaching me to pay attention way more than I ever have, because I am just so bobble-headed right now that the Mercury retrograde makes it very easy for me to make humongous mistakes. So I have to be more focused even than I normally am, because almost as if we were leading up to this retrograde, it's just been a fear that I'm going to make a mistake because I'm over. And the truth is that it's happened because I manifested that fear, if that makes sense. There's something else around this that I'm picking up on, like, just stacks of paper. I'm just seeing stacks of paper. So it is probably heavily influenced by other things that are going on as well. And, we get to the point where we're just like, I don't want to deal with this right now. Your problem is really not that big of a deal. I'm sitting there at my desk right now, and it's just not, the response to that is not good. You know, they're not understanding you. You're not understanding them. Nobody is being understood. We're teaching people how we want to be treated by how we treat them. But we also have to take into consideration that we're humans sometimes too. The sun comes in opposition with Pluto, and that is challenging, of course, because the sun is where you shine in your career. Pluto retrograde, focused on the home, that does kind of narrow down, unfortunately, where that influence that we're referring to probably is. It is at home. There's just something with one of your girls. It's like they're total opposites right now. One has everything together and everything is cool and everything is fine. She knows what she wants to do. The other one, there's just something. I don't know what it is. Okay. It could be an influence of somebody around here. It could have something to do with a boy. The boys always screw everything up. It could just be the way that she's reacting to the changing hormones. Um, I'm not saying it's anything bad. It's just, it feels like it's sucking you dry. Just put it that way. That's the only. I mean, it just, that's what it feels. It just feels like it's sucking you dry for some reason. My son, when he gets into a mood, it feels exactly like that. It's just like a constant. I'm mom, so he can dump his constant, all of his feelings on me, because he's really protective of his feelings, and that's why I get all of, and it's so hard sometimes, as much as I love him, to be that person for him. And this is kind of what I'm feeling like that's coming it's around her, if that makes sense. So I mean, clearly you are fantastic at dealing with that situation, but I just have to say that it's not easy to find a balance between the two, but it's possible and imperative to find a balance between the two. That way it doesn't feel like they're bleeding over, and that's when you get overwhelmed, if that makes sense. King of Swords. I just pulled this card. I'm gonna redo this just in case I didn't, because I don't think I did. I thought I did, though. I really thought I did. I'm gonna go back and have to watch the video now to see if I did, because that's so weird, but I may not have. And I want to make sure. Now, the King of Swords does fit you. Absolutely does fit you. Swords are air, they're logic, they're strength, they're the king, is in charge of everything. He's all about self-improvement. He's full of wisdom. That's the role that you play. It's the role that you play at home and at work. Honestly, you play that role in many different situations. I think sometimes, and I don't blame you, you wish you didn't have to play that role. You wish you could be the one that just didn't take care of responsibilities and just had fun instead. And I get it. We are made the way we're supposed to be made, but it's boring sometimes. Four of Swords. So we still have swords. Four of Swords is reversed. I do believe. Recuperation and recovery. That's what I thought it was. Recuperation and recovery. It means just because it's overwhelming now doesn't mean that you won't get a rest from it either. So a lot of people could take recuperation as recuperating from something like an illness or an injury or something along those lines. I don't see that specifically. I think that this is more energetic recuperation and recovery. I'm not saying that I see you in the tub, okay? But I will say what I am seeing is bath time meditations. With candles, maybe music. A glass of wine is definitely okay. For me, when I'm in that zone, I want to be in that zone for a while, but you don't have to do it for a long time either, you know. Sometimes it's just 30 minutes at the end of the day to unwind. But connecting with your guides too, that's awesome. Oh, by the way, I also see things, in patterns, in carpets, in patterns on tiles where you're looking, or the clouds, or the walls, where you're looking at the texture and see a bunny, or a lion, or a dragon. One of the things that I love about not being able to see actually is we had this, I don't have it anymore, unfortunately, but we had this tub that had this tile that was like sand made to look like sandstone or something like that. So it had all those weird, and without my glasses, I literally, it was like watching a movie, you know, as it moved from one thing to another. And it was fascinating. And I'm saying this because I know you do that. No, you're not weird. We all do. Anyways, that's what I have for you. Moving on to Linda, we have Mars continuing in Virgo, still focused on triggers, bringing up anger triggers, and those anger triggers are spreading, so to speak, because Mars has been in a square with Venus pretty much all week, was last week, in through the the rest of this week as well. And that square with Venus is bad enough. It's like these triggers getting in the way of your goals, specifically your creative goals. And at the same time, Mars is going to move into opposition with Saturn and Neptune. Saturn and Neptune are focused on your day-to-day schedule, what you're getting done on a daily basis. And we still have Mercury retrograde. In fact, we're really moving into the first full week of the Mercury retrograde. It already felt like it's been two, but I mean, maybe that's just my opinion, okay? I think it started early for me. So, but we are dealing with that in Leo, in the sign of arrogance and ego. We have a Mercury retrograde. So, with all of this sort of happening as we get to the end of the week, the Mars becomes not a square, a small challenge, but a much bigger challenge as it moves into that T square when Saturn and Neptune join um, Mars and Venus. This is kind of a pain. Not the end of the world, but kind of a pain. At the same time, these things, they get in the way of the flow of our schedule, of what we want to do in that day-to-day schedule for a reason, because that's what brings it to our attention. When it's just kind of sort of there in the background going, "Hi," you're like, yeah, I'll get to you. Yeah, I'll get to you. It's kind of like when my husband was in the hospital when he lost his fingertips. He's such a patient man. No one let me in because this would not have happened if I was there. He's such a patient man. Sitting there, bleeding with a dirty towel over his hand, going, there's so many people here who are worse off than I am, so I'll just be patient and I'll wait. And 6 freaking hours went by while he continued to sit there with a dirty blood-stained rag on his fingers, no fingertips. 6 whole hours went by. And a nurse finally comes out and she does the double take on him and she says, are you still here? Why are you still here? It's almost like she started yelling at him. And he says, well, it's just, I understand that there's other people. She's like, honey, if you don't start making some noise, we're just going to forget that you're here. Okay. She just flat out told him in a place, a setting like this, you need to keep coming up and reminding us that you're here. Okay. Because everybody else is distracting us. And that's that little voice, that little hey. So if he's back there going, hey, Linda, just a little lesson here for you. You're like, yeah, I'll get to you. I'll get to you eventually. Yeah. Now, when he gets up in your face and he goes, here's your lesson, you're going to be like, I don't need this to disrupt my flow. But okay, I guess I have to deal with it because it's sitting here, sitting on top of my paperwork, not letting me do a thing, right? This is the challenge, and it's a challenge just working with Mercury's retrograde right now by putting that wrench in your perfectly planned schedule, putting that wrench in your plans. And that wrench could be being put in your plans for a reason. Either we're delaying things because we need to delay them. We don't like delays, but delays have a purpose. I mean, I can't count the number of times I have been so frustrated that I couldn't do something only to find out why I couldn't do it and been so grateful that that frustration was handed to me, right? And it could be in that sense. But I'm also feeling, okay, this is so strange because I literally like right as I said that, I just saw a woman wearing a fur coat. But she was smiling and she was waving, and it was almost like she was from the 20s. But she doesn't seem like a strict person. She was more like a wild person in the 20s. The original Wild Children, I guess. I don't know who that is. Maybe you do. Short, curly, blonde hair. And a huge brown fur coat. It looks huge because she's very petite. And yes, the band around the head. She's dancing. We seem to lose that carefree mentality as we get older. We look back on that carefree mentality as what got in the way of our success. But I think what she's trying to tell us is that not having that carefree mentality is also what gets in the way of your success. You put your own blocks, your own obstacles up, and it makes it very difficult to move forward. So we're dealing with Mercury's obstacles, your own obstacles. I like this woman. She smells like roses and lavender and a blue flower, little tiny blue flowers I'm seeing too. Roses with these little tiny blue flowers, so pretty. The Emperor in reverse. This is interesting, talking about Mercury retrogrades and ego-driven everything, because of course the Emperor is the dictator. The Emperor is the opposite. Weird. Okay. I don't know why that happens. It's almost like somebody jumped in. Okay. I hope you can still hear me. Got the video. Okay, that's still working. Okay, well, oh, there it goes. Okay, never mind. Something weird just happened. And speaking of Mercury retrograde and arrogant dictator people. Okay, that's what we were talking about. Leaders versus dictators. Whoa. Whoa. Okay. Yeah. Um Interesting. And that lady. There's a big huge ring on her finger too. She's not married. Oh no, 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 no. But she gets people to give them to her. This woman is the antithesis of you. You take care of everything yourself. It's, but at the same time, we're always two sides of the same coin, right? For whatever we are, we show there's an element of the opposite inside of us somewhere. Maybe you're battling that person. Maybe you have battled that individual and it feels like that individual is crawling back, trying to take control. Maybe it's time to forgive her and yourself and put down that burden, if that makes sense. That's what I have for you. I think we're chit-chatting next week and I'm really looking forward to it. Moving on to Maddie. Mars continues to be in Virgo, bringing up anger triggers. Starting off the week squared with Venus, which is focused on long-term goals, and by the middle of the week, moving into opposition with Neptune and Saturn as well, which creates a pretty big challenge as they move into a square with Venus also. We get a T square. Saturn and Neptune are focused on your day-to-day schedule, what it is that you're doing, actively doing to create these goals. these ideas, these plans, these things that you want to do later on in life. Saturn and Neptune are both retrograde. So Saturn is all about responsibility and projecting responsibility. Retrograde is a little bit different. It's almost like not taking responsibility. Neptune being retrograde, very intuitive. The intuition does get amplified a bit in retrograde, but also we're looking at the root of that irresponsibility. And the root of that irresponsibility always is stuff, emotional stuff, very, very, very deep stuff. Oh, sorry. Very, very deep stuff that we prefer to keep hidden because we don't want people to see it. We don't trust people to see it. And a lot of times those feelings are what's behind the irresponsibility. And that's where these two planets are sort of working together in a way. That's almost why it's so important for them to be in such close conjunction with each other, and yet at the same time be retrograde together at the same time, because they went retrograde within a week or two of each other. It's the justification for not taking responsibility that's the problem in human nature, right? Because it's very easy for us to talk ourselves into doing what we want to do, right? I know I have a responsibility, and I know I should do this, and I know I should that, and I did say that I was going to get up and do this, and you know what? I just I don't want to. I don't feel good. I'm gonna lay down in bed, which transcends into I do what I want. And it's actually kind of like, when you're a little kid, we've all done it. When you're a little kid and you just didn't want to go and get up and go to school, or you're trying to avoid something at school or what have you. And so, you pretend that you're sick, and right there at the beginning, the beginning of the morning, you're laying in bed, you're dying because you're so sick. There's no way you can go to school. Oh my gosh, my throat hurts so bad. I can barely swallow. Right? And then your parents are like, oh my God, you're sick. You're staying home. Oh, yay. And then you lay in bed for a while and you're like, yes, I get to stay in bed all day. When you're a little kid, you got about 10 minutes before that becomes not so much fun anymore. And you want to get up. You want to go watch TV. You want to eat. You want to play outside. Right. And as the day progresses, it gets harder and harder and harder to keep it the ruse that you're sick. We've all done it. And because we learned it at an early age. So our brains now are just like, we know how to justify how to get what we want. That's our brains working. That Mercury retrograde that's happening right now in Leo is what that's all about. And that Mercury retrograde is showing us all that making those decisions, not a good idea. Not a good idea. It just bit me in the ass the other day. Because, yeah, I do it too. We all do. So, yeah. Do we always choose to do what's right and take care of responsibility? No. Not a single one of us. We all have that voice in our head that talks us into doing what we want to do. But that voice is also destroying us because it gives us justification for doing what we want to do instead of taking on responsibilities, whatever they may be. And that's where the challenge becomes amplified with Saturn and Neptune's involvement. So there may be instances that come up around that, with that, etc., that are going to be frustrating, and they're going to be stupid, and they're going to be like a waste of time. And why do I have to deal with that? Well, that's what growth is opportunities to grow, to understand, to dig a little bit deeper, to change. That's what life is all about. That's what we're supposed to do. Five of Swords in reverse. We've been pulling a lot of swords this week, and swords are all about strength and resilience, which we definitely need to be in this crazy world. The Five of Swords in this position indicates victory over personal problems, slanders, and jealousies. It's so easy. It's so much easier, I think, than we make it out to be or realize it is, but it really is. It could change very easily just by changing the way you approach a conversation. And no, it doesn't have to be all you making the change, but somebody has to begin the change. Somebody has to take that responsibility. And it could be you, I'm just saying. So that's what I have for you. Moving on to Regina. No planets in Scorpio again this week. We still have, the usual suspects. As, of course, the dark moon went retrograde and is coming back into Scorpio again. And by the end of the week, she actually does come back into Scorpio, continuing to focus on the past. But Juno is also focused on the past. And Vespa moves from focusing on the past to focusing on self. Really looking at, actually, I think what's interesting about this is that Vespa is all about security. And when you're talking about personal security, it's like you're looking back at the past for examples, but you're also looking back at the past for as a reminder for what you don't want, what made you feel insecure. Now, most of our lives we're running away from anything that makes us feel insecure, and we're usually not very successful that way because our it's uncomfortable. So of course our knee-jerk reaction is to get away from it. But at the same time, when we face it, we take the power away from it. When we're running away from it, it has power. Clearly, that's why we're running away from it. But when we face it, we take the power away from it, and it becomes something that is no longer relevant to what you're doing. It's not making the decisions for you, if that makes sense. Perfect prime example. I had a stepfather who was a horrible person. Oh my gosh. I don't talk about him very often, and I rarely voice the things that happened with him. But he was vile. And it wasn't necessarily just physical abuse. There was a lot of psychological and emotional, and I just want to completely and totally break your spirit. Which he didn't. Not completely. The point is that I've spent the last, what are we, 2025, 30 some odd years. Wow. 30 some odd years since I last saw him. Coming to terms with the things he did. At one point, I went down to Southern California to the place that we lived, looked at the pool. There was issues there with the pool. Stood there in front of the door, sobbed in front of strangers, which is usually not like me. But it was cleansing. It was what was needed. I can't really explain it. because it was just such a surreal moment that I found myself driven to go to this place and stand there and cry in front of it. Even in my brain, I was thinking, why are you doing this? It makes absolutely no sense why you would do this. But I did. And, it was an instance of release, of peace. It didn't have power over me anymore all of a sudden. And I started focusing on other things that were triggers. The weirdest things can be triggers, like the Eye of the Tiger song. It had such a deep trigger, and all I could sort of attach to it was the feeling of that particular time, the very, very, very early 80s, because I don't remember a lot of it. So I can, it's only an attachment to a feeling, right? Makes me sick almost when I hear it, if that makes any sense at all. And suddenly this song becomes very prominent in my life because it just happens to be the absolute favorite song of my husband's brother and best friend in the world. And he's just like, no, I love this song. And he's dancing and he's singing. And of course, it reminds him of the early 80s when he was a kid. Completely different memories, And I'm just like, I hate this song. Why? Why do you keep doing this to me? I hate the song. And he's like, well, you know what? And he doesn't know anything about this stuff. And he just all of a sudden busts out and he looks at me and he goes, you have to stop thinking about it in that way. Just like that. And, my first response was, I'm sorry, what the fuck do you know? But then I took over and I went, you know what? He's not wrong. He's not wrong. All of a sudden, after this conversation that he and I had, this happened like a year and a half ago, that damn song pops up all over the place. And now I laugh every time I hear it because I think of him. It has now been attached to something different, and the old feeling is just no longer there anymore. But it doesn't have power over me anymore. It's very strange. People think that that there's supposed to be some sort of great cosmic thing that lifts off of you when this happens, and it doesn't. It's just like one day you're just like, oh, okay, that doesn't have power over me anymore. And it's as simple as that. And I feel that that's what Vespa's role is currently right now, is bringing you a new way of looking at security by unattaching, that's the word. Okay. Unattaching yourself to things that don't feel right. Memories that are not necessarily good memories, if that makes sense. It's redefining what that means for you. And I think that there's an awful lot of freedom to that. I really feel that you're feeling a lot more freedom. No, that doesn't mean that the bad things that have taken place have changed, but it does mean that it's easier for you to deal with those things because you feel that freedom. You took that piece of trash you've been lugging around and said, you know what, I'm just going to leave that right there. And now all of a sudden you're walking a lot faster, right? Judgment in reverse. This was not, see, it disappeared because it's such a bad, no, it's not a bad card, but it's not the best one either. I don't like pulling judgment in reverse because it is, well, it can be bad judgment, honestly. Poor judgment, disappointments, procrastination, theft. The D word, divorce, is mentioned in there. And I'm not saying divorce necessarily. But Bad judgment is usually emotional based. When your reaction to something, you allow your reaction to something to actually my brain is just like, oh, I'm sorry, you want to word today? Yes, I do. It needs a break. When your feelings choose how to react, is what I'm trying to say here. It's usually poor judgment when that happens. And being a Scorpio, hell, even being a Libra, Libras are pretty laid back. They take a lot of shit. But when they get to that point, there always comes that point and they just snap. And that is not pleasant to see. Okay. Absolutely not pleasant to see. I've seen it. I know. And it's also unpleasant for Scorpios as well. So it's always my best policy to shut my mouth, bite my tongue if I have to, take a step back, and contemplate what I'm going to say before I say it, if that makes sense. That way it goes over a little bit easier. That's what I have for you. I'm going to pause really quick because I really want some more coffee, and I'll be right back. Moving on to Theresa. No planets in Scorpio this week. We have the dark moon moving back into Scorpio, of course. She went retrograde again. And at the end of the week, she's coming back into Scorpio. Juno continues to be in Scorpio, focusing that sort of reflection on your relationships in the past, how they developed. But Vespa is actually what's really interesting this week, because Vespa's focus is right there on the cusp of the past and you, the person you are, who you are today. And specifically what made you who you are today. And security has always seemed to have been in your control, if that makes sense. It's like you felt most secure when you have had when you have the reins, if that makes sense. And I feel this overwhelming sort of feeling of taking back control. I'm taking back control, not in a vindictive, arrogant way, but in a I am really fed up with sort of having to schedule everything around everybody else. So I'm taking control of that. My life and my decisions. I'm not holding decisions anymore, waiting to see what somebody else has feelings about. I'm taking control of that again. And this has happened before, where you just sort of all of a sudden just go, you know what? This isn't working for me. I'm taking control back. Right. And I keep hearing those words over and over and over again. I'm taking control back. Mercury's retrograde in Leo is all arrogance and ego based, because that's what Leo is. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It depends on how we use it, right? If we are putting ourselves first and screw everybody else, that's obviously a bad thing. But with a healthy ego, we understand the importance of being there for ourselves and taking control of our lives and what we need to do. And I really feel that this is the epiphany of this week is where you're just like, you know what, I need to be in the driver's seat again. And I need to take control and do what is necessary and what is best for me, for finances, for my family, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where Vespa's influence is. Relationships and the sort of looking back on the relationships. We tend to do that in an emotional way, as in we're looking at what we don't have anymore and sort of mourning it in a way. But I feel like that's changing for you. And that's part of what's putting you in the driver's seat, so to speak. Not that you don't mourn the relationship, but instead of being sucked into that, you're more gravitating towards something that you can improve, something that you can do. And instead of putting the part-time effort into it, you're putting more time into it, if that makes sense. And that's what sort of builds up that control. And that's what sort of tips the balance to make you feel like you're making a difference, when sometimes you feel like you're not. You're just kind of spinning your wheels. Six of Swords. What I love about this card, he's almost there. He's so close to land. Swords are strength. Swords have come up a lot in these readings. Almost every single one has been a sword so far. Strength and logic, level-headedness, which is important during a Mercury retrograde in Leo, which can be very highly emotional as well. I like it. I do. I like it. The Six of Swords in this position indicates stress and pressure, but there's an optimistic outlook. Generally with this card, when you're moving towards something, when you're moving towards success, it's a lot of stress and pressure. But the stress and pressure has a cause. Whereas stress and pressure that is just sort of, you don't really know where it's going to land or where the shoe's going to drop, that is almost torture, right? So this is different. You're moving, you're not relieving stress or eliminating it. You're just moving to a type of stress that is more manageable and livable, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you this week. Moving on to Jillian. No major planets in Scorpio this week. The dark moon comes back into Scorpio at the end of the week because, of course, she goes retrograde again. She really is like a woman, just changing her mind every 2 seconds, or Daniel does that too. Or John does that too. Of course, they're not women, because I know a lot of men that do that too. But we're often accused of it, is all I'm saying. Maybe that's because it's not actually us. Anyways, moving on. Yes, the dark moon is coming in to influence things. Specifically, again, at the end of the week, bringing that element of mourning the fact that you can't change the past. It makes perfect sense because I do know what just happened this week in the anniversary of that. And your dad's birthday is coming up. I also know that as well. And this is that time to really think about that. And I understand that because today is the anniversary of when my Uncle Kenny died. And he was Yammy's son. He was your grandma Linda's brother. And he was really the most stable man in my life for most of my life growing up. And I barely made it into adulthood when he died. And I think in a way that was his plan. He lost his kidney failure when I was a year old, and he died when I was 19 years old. And being on dialysis all of that 18 years, which is a really long time. Most people don't survive that long, and it's really hard on the body. But he did. And he did probably for multiple different reasons. The biggest one being that he wanted to have everything set up so that his mother was taken care of. But the timing also was interesting. And his birthday was the 4th of July. So this is very similar to your dad's, in the same month, no less, of this sort of 2 weeks between those two dates. And it takes up pretty much most of the month thinking about him. now thinking about your dad as well. And we long to be able to go back and fix things, change things. You know, they've made wrote so many books and made so many movies about people being able to go back and change something so that it never happens. Um, the truth is, we can't do that. Only in movies. The only thing that we can do is learn to live in a different way, which is not always easy and it's not always pleasant. One of the things that I love that really helps me is that as much as I sit here and I miss my dad, I'm in Hayward and the air just feels like him still so many years later. Would I remember knowing that he's gone? Every time I think about him, that's the first thing that I think of is that he's gone. And then the next thing is, instead of driving to him, I can call him right here. He goes with me everywhere. That's a blessing and a curse. It's not the same. But it doesn't help me feel like he's not gone. He's just there in a different form. Brought to me in a different way and for a different reason, if that makes sense. The other thing is that part of that change in the past that we can't change, or that need to change things in the past that we can't change, so the dark moon is Juno, because Juno's focus is relationships and how they have developed in the past. And in this situation, it's very easy to go into the if only this had happened and that had happened, and blah blah blah, and we go down this rabbit hole of things that we can't control and things that we can't do, and that's what really fuels mental health issues, I think, because we start to feel like there is no control. We have no control of anything. And it's not so much because we're focused on what's going on now. We're looking at what's going on now from inside that rabbit hole. And inside that rabbit hole says, if you couldn't fix any of this stuff, what makes you think you can fix what's in front of you? And it's like you almost don't even try. So that's where it can be very dangerous. Yes, it's very easy to fall down that rabbit hole, but you can retrieve yourself from it. That's the important thing. Can and should retrieve yourself from it. Because the longer you stay in there, the longer you do nothing about your life, the longer you do nothing to reclaim your life. They say, I'm sure you've heard me say it, there's a statute of limitations on what you can blame on your parents. Ultimately, the choice is yours whether to be a good person, a successful person, and not a good person, and non-successful person. And with all of those lovely choices comes freedom. And freedom is really important. Really very important. Five of Cups. Everybody has been getting swords today, but you get cups. The Five of Cups. Interesting enough with this picture here. I've said this in this reading a million times. I don't know if I've said it to you. If I have, I'm really sorry. What I love about this picture is you got the 5 cups, 3 of which have fallen over and the water has spilled out. And a lot of times when something like that happens, we get really frustrated. But looking at the picture of the swords to refill them is like right there. It's all about not making a mountain out of a molehill, if that makes sense. Five of Cups in this position indicates hope for the future. Learn valuable lessons from past experiences. How fitting. We're going to leave it there. That's what I have for you, darling. Moving on to Amber. No major planets in Scorpio this week at all. Focus is on the past, sort of moving into focus on self in a way, because Vespa is very much poised right in the cusp of both of them. And when you've got something bringing both of those two elements together, it's really looking at where you've been and how that's influenced who you are today, and taking the opportunity to really look at whether or not that influence has been a good influence or a not so good influence. And you're probably going to find it's a little bit of both. Although that opinion is really in the eye of the beholder, really. We are very hard on ourselves. So we tend to see less success stories and more needs for improvement. But I dare you, encourage you to do it a little differently. It's a weird tool that I have used before. Actually, it's not weird to me. It's weird to many people in the beginning. It becomes less weird. It just depends on the individual. But I like the mirror tool, which is using your mirror to speak to yourself, so that it doesn't feel so much like you're just talking to yourself. Although I do that all the time too. But you're actually seeing yourself, and you can actually respond to yourself, and it keeps you accountable, because you are saying these words to yourself. Whereas when it's just in your head, we tend to be a lot harder on ourselves than I think we realize that we are. So using this technique actually helps you to identify that and to be accountable for it, and it's actually pretty cool, as it turns out. With that being said, Juno is really about how those relationships have shaped over the past as well. And it's sort of like it's doing an inventory on all of the different things that have taken place in the past, and whether or not you're using the lessons that you learned from those particular situations to better your situation, or are you using them to kind of excuse why you're not where you want to be, if that makes sense. We all do a little bit of both. We all start out doing a little bit of both. Okay. If we nail something right away, we're immediately, well, yeah, that's because I did all of this stuff. If we don't, then, well, it's because I was abused as a child, right? It's either way. We can go either way. Dancing in the middle of it isn't always the best option, okay? But I think that most of us do that anyways, and we need to dance a little bit more into the accountability side in order to be successful, if that makes sense. The other thing is that I'm picking up quite heavily for you this week. The word cleaning is coming up. And what I find interesting, actually, is that the last conversation that we had, when we were talking about your guys' experience with your friend and how you took the initiative to burn some sage and clean things up. And there's something about that is significant to say, because I feel like it'll come up this week too, but it's happened before. You seem to be the cleaning crew. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like Here I am having to be the one to come in and clean this up in some way. And I feel that coming up again. And Mercury's retrograde in Leo. Leo's all about ego. And very, very, very self-involved. And where most of us project that we're all about everybody else, to make everybody else happy. And I think that there's just this sort of, because it's during this particular retrograde that this happens, where it comes up and you're just like, you know what? I don't want to clean this mess up. It's not my mess. And you're going to feel bad. But before you second guess whether or not you are, these feelings are validated, the answer is yes. Okay. This is not your mess to clean up. And for somebody to try and bring it to your doorstep, that's wrong. Okay. And don't feel bad because you've decided that you're not going to clean up that mess. And we have the Hierophant in reverse, which is very, very, very strange. We'll see. The Hierophant is the shaman or the Pope. He's the highest human person closest to God, the universe, what have you. And in this position, feeling discontented with the way things are at this time, it's time to break out of your rut and find something new to inspire you. Yeah. But you can't do if you're stuck cleaning messes that you didn't make, right? There's something in that cleaning messes that you didn't make where you're just like, this is the last straw and I'm out of this. Because it is a situation that feels like it's also pulling you down, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you. Moving on to Peg. We have the dark moon in Sagittarius pretty much all week. She does go retrograde again because that's what she does. And what day is that? Actually, she doesn't get very far into Sagittarius before she goes retrograde right in the middle of the week on Wednesday, 2 degrees. So temporary dark moon time, although of course that will change later on. And her focus really is on the past. And with the fact that she's direct, it's almost like she's direct for a week and then retrograde for a week. It's so, that's how often it happens. With Sagittarius is focused on the mind and how the mind works. And then you have this sort of feminine mind-changing influence that's really focused on the past. What's interesting about this is really looking at instances in the past where you maybe either allowed somebody to change your mind on something or talked yourself out of something, right? And how many times has that taken place in the past? And where has that led you? And it's like this lesson coming up during a Mercury retrograde, mind you. So it's a pretty powerful one. It's almost like it's showing you maybe a pattern that has developed that you didn't quite realize was a pattern, or you knew it was a pattern, but you didn't quite realize how deep the roots to this pattern were. And that's very interesting, actually, because it's hard to break a pattern when the roots are misplaced by where we think they are. They could be, let's say, for instance, it is a career thing. Okay. We're making a career decision and your brain is going to, well, you have to work with other people. That could be a problem. And what if they don't like you? And that could be a problem. And, all of the usual thoughts that come up that you use that are on the shelf to talk you out of doing whatever it is that you're going to do. And in that sense, the dark moon is coming in and sort of showing you how long that's been. And you'd be surprised to know this probably goes all the way back to childhood. And that there is something specific that happened in said childhood that maybe is the reason why, as Sagittarius as you are, may be the reason why you're not quite the aggressive Sagittarius that many other Sagittarians can be. Because a lot of times that is just sort of beaten out of us, or, you know, finger wagged out of us, or talked to out of us, or whatever. It's a stifling of the voice. And what we don't realize is that years go by, that influence long gone, and we have created that voice that continues to stifle our growth and stifle who we are and what we're doing. And I feel like something is going to come up this week to trigger this very thought process, if it hasn't happened already last week. Okay. And this time, it's very important to, instead of doing the same thing that you've always done, it's very important to look at this from a completely different perspective, and maybe taking the chance of entertaining the thought of making a different decision. But you can't make a different decision and then approach it in the same way as you have before. It has to be all new, an all new way. And you have to constantly shush that voice, because that voice wants to take over. That voice wants to be heard and wants to control what it is that you're doing. You need to be on top of that voice 24/7. That's the hard part. That's where people get screwed up all the time. Now, I still have many, many days where that voice takes over, but it's not as many days as it used to be. And that's success, that's growth, that's one foot in front of the other. Seven of Pentacles is the card that I pulled for you. Pentacles are all about money and good things, so that is good. Seven of Pentacles in this position indicates perseverance in the face of adversity, overcoming frustrations related to work. Not a bad deal. That's what I have for you. And finally, Mama Sherri, focus is on the mind and how the mind works. And in a sense, there are some ideas sort of boiling up in your mind there. But the dark moon is also influencing things in Sagittarius a little bit, starting off the first half of the week being direct, going retrograde halfway through the week again, because that's what she does, back and forth, back and forth. Chicken, I want chicken for dinner. No, actually, I'm changing my mind. I want fish for dinner. No, you know what? I think chicken is better. No, you know what? No, I want fish. I definitely have to have fish. Where's the chicken? How come you're giving me fish? That's the dark moon, okay? She is just that annoying, and I think that her influence, it can be that frustrating also, because it's like it's constantly changing and flipping back and forth. At the same time, she's only mimicking what we do as human beings with that flip-flopping back and forth. And her focus is mainly influencing the past. Something that you can't change. No, you're right. But at the same time, it's almost like when you're talking about thoughts and how your brain works, okay, we go like that, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you may say that that's not true. You don't tend to do that. We all do that from time to time. When we get stuck somewhere, especially emotionally, we go back and forth. We can't help it. It's who we are. When we stress and worry over something, we get into that back and forth thing. It's who we are. And I feel like what she's coming in and saying to you right now is, it's not that you're not doing it, it's that you're not identifying that you're doing it. You're not seeing that you're doing it. And when you see that you're doing it, it gives you the choices to change direction, right? Because we all need that from time to time. There's something that you keep going back and forth on. I don't know what it is. I don't need to know what it is. What I do know is your heart knows. No. Your brain knows what to do. Your heart doesn't like the answer. And every time that happens, that's when we go into that back and forth. We're trying to justify a way to get what we want and have a successful outcome. You and I both know that's bullshit. It doesn't work like that. Okay. So I feel like in a sense, this back and forth is making it a little bit easier for you to put it off, but you can't put it off anymore. It just, words need to be said. Good judgment. Judgment. Good judgment. Judgments are in your favor. Let me take a look here. Gosh, I cannot see with my glasses on anymore. Judgment being made in one's favor. Repent and forgive. Rebirth and improvement. We always slip backwards. There's a million reasons why that happens. It doesn't mean that we're stuck continuing to slip backwards. And we can't mourn who we were while ignoring who we need to be now, if that makes any sense at all. It actually kind of does to me. That's what I have for you. That's what I have for everybody. I will see you guys next week. Have a great week, everybody.